Hi, should we get started or try to get more students to come because it says there it starts at 7:30, so and it's 7:31 now. So is everybody ready here?
Typing
Do we
right
have
now.
all the students? Okay, so you're from Taipei?
Yes, we're ready whenever our opponents and the judges.
Okay, 1 second. I'm just gonna make sure that I get all the names. Oh, actually, it doesn't say the names on the ballot. So okay. Can you just so from Taipei? Can you just tell me what your names are and if you're speaking first or second? Can you just let's start with Taipei.
For sure. The first speaker for Typing American will be Alexander Hutchinson, and the second
Okay.
speaker for Typing American will be Derek Yang.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Taipei Alexander first, Derek second, and your Neg, right? Neg for second speaker overall. Okay.
Yes.
What about thank you. What about over Lake?
Yeah,
Can you tell me your names and your speaking order?
Musa Chamin is first speaker and Eric
Chamin.
Fink is second speaker, and we're Af first.
Mr. Chamin, how do you spell that?
MUSAB, and last name is CHUMMUN.
Okay, so you say you're first?
Yeah.
And then what's your opponent's name? Sorry, not opponent's, like partner.
Eric Vink.
Eric. Okay, Eric second. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, because it doesn't show the names of individual players on the ballot, so I had to get your names like from you directly, because you were already at autos. They don't list the names individually anymore. Okay, so in that case, I think we have everyone, right? Anybody not here? Like, did you guys notice all your partners are here? Can you just give me a thumbs up that everybody's here? Okay, so we have everybody. Judges here too. I think I'm judging with John Paul and Cecilia. Is it? Yeah. So they're both here too. So the judges are also here. Tech is here, and we have some like spectators. So judges, are you guys okay to start now? Judge John Paul and Cecilia. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay.
I'm ready to.
In that case, we're gonna get started because we start at 7:30. Your time begins on your first word. You may begin anytime. Good luck.
Eric and I affirm contention 1 is staying modern. The CFR writes that Japan's constitution has remained untouched for over 70 years. Unfortunately, the methods of war have changed drastically since then. This is exemplified through gray zone threats or hybrid warfare. CEPA 21 writes that hybrid warfare combines military and non-military means that are intended to blur the lines between war and peace. Hybrid warfare is radically changing the playing field as the ISW 20 writes that hybrid wars already dominate 21st century conflict and will continue to do so. Article 9 blocks the hybrid response in 2 ways. First is preemptive readiness. Because gray zone attacks blur the lines, Stimson Center 20 writes, deterrence does not have much effect on gray zone situations. Instead, it is necessary to impose an intolerable cost on the attackers through preemptive actions. Unfortunately, Yamaguchi 19 writes that Japan is bound by a vaguely defined notion that Japan must suffer an attack before it can militarily respond. Thus, by allowing for offensive capabilities, it would explicitly permit preemptive strikes, key to stopping hybrid attacks. The second way Article 9 prevents hybrid defense is by stopping effective defense. Article 9 permits retaliation only whenever absolutely necessary and of the minimum force possible. Thus, Natsu 16 writes that while international law justifies stronger force, Japanese law allows extremely limited options for Japan's action in a gray zone situation. In other words, Natsu writes, the laws in Japan will expose its vulnerability to hostile conduct, especially in hybrid warfare, concluding that this weakness can be exploited by hostile actors in a hybrid attack. Allowing for offensive capabilities would take off the restrictions, allowing for Japan to properly handle hybrid threats. The impact is Chinese expansionism. Shalani 21 explains, through hybrid warfare methods, China is advancing expansionism, which could trigger armed conflict with Japan. In fact, Essay 22 notes how China is increasing its presence in the Senkaku Islands. Crucially, Ball 14 writes that conflict between Japan and China will veer out of control, leading to Asia's first serious war. Empirically, Cormac 20 says that China has been using hybrid warfare against Japan over the dispute regarding the Senkaku Islands. Overall, O'Hanley 19 writes that because of this, U.S. will have to get involved, leading to a U.S.-China war which can kill hundreds of thousands of lives. That's why you affirm since China would attack when Japan is weaker, not when they're stronger. Contention 2 is Taiwan. Right 22 finds that Russia and China unveiled a sweeping long-term agreement that challenges Taiwan. This is enabling Chinese aggression on Taiwan. As last month, Staff 22 writes, Taiwan has for months faced stepped-up military harassment by Beijing. Taiwan has an Asian fleet, and concern is that China may be emboldened by Russia's invasion and decide to attack the island. Scarily, Fang 22 writes that a Russian intelligence document claimed Chinese President Xi Jinping has plans to annex the island nation this fall. Current U.S. support is limited. As Bergman 21 writes, the current security assistance system is limited, inconsistent, and not strategic. U.S. assistance is, quote, not fit for purpose and is out of sync with its priorities by allies. And U.S. support exacerbates the issue. As Nathan 12 writes, Chinese believe the U.S. is a revisionist power that seeks to curtail China's political influence and harm China's interests. However, in the aft role Japan can solve, as Zhang 21 writes, Japan's new Prime Minister Kishida has expressed concern over a China-Taiwan conflict. Kishida's current policy will remain contradictory and self-undermining unless he revises Article 9. If this culminates in an actual revision of the Constitution, it will allow Japan to react to threats and send troops to foreign nations. In response to events, Japan could intervene in the China-Taiwan conflict. The subsequent nuclear proliferation would deter China. Global Times 22 reports that Japan has enough plutonium to produce 6,000 nuclear bombs and the capability to acquire nuclear weapons virtually overnight. The impact is a China-US war. The United States extended deterrence is losing credibility. As Huff 20 writes, extended nuclear deterrence is inherently dubious, and the asymmetry between the US, it will continue to be a problem. This is problematic since Colby 16 writes that the most likely route to nuclear use is via a nasty conventional war, as what happened in World War II. That's why Ringberg 16 quantifies that a nuclear war involving less than 0.5% of the world's nuclear arsenal would put up to 2.5 billion people's lives at risk. Thus, affirm.
Could I just
Give me a sec. Oh wait, DY, you want to go?
Yeah, for sure. Before Alex begins case, could I just see the evidence that says that China will attack this fall?
Yeah, sure. Eric, can you put a Google Doc in?
Yeah.
And can you like share this stuff on the Google Doc?
Oh, do you need our emails or?
No, he'll just put the link in the chat.
Okay.
That sounds great.
Hi. Give me a sec to get my timer open. And I
Wait,
just want
Alex,
to.
wait until
Yeah?
they put the evidence in.
Oh yeah.
So you can listen to your case as well.
Yeah, I'm putting it right now. Eric, can you put in the link?
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, that's the context.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have the cut card, like the citation?
No,
of the...
it's the first line.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are my opponents ready? Are the judges ready? Great. Okay. My time. Oh, I'm Alex. I'm first speaker. My time will begin now. We negate. Resolve, Japan should revise Article 9 of its constitution to develop offensive military capabilities. Contention 1 is China. For the past 70 years on the status quo, China is not looking to invade Taiwan. CFR 21 warns she believes Beijing can threaten Taiwan into surrendering and reunification without an actual invasion or bloodshed. Part 21 elaborates a failed invasion would bankrupt these claims and jeopardize the CCP's domestic legitimacy. There are at least 6 reasons why forceful unification is too risky. However, affirming destroys this delicate balance, as Kubo 14 finds that Japan acquiring offensive weapons would infuriate China. In order to save face, she will be forced into trying to fulfill China's decades-old dream of taking Taiwan. Beckley 21 writes, China will engage in violence in the Taiwanese Strait to save face because the CCP has staked its legitimacy with its influence over the Pacific. Inaction towards the prospect of a Japanese challenge will be humiliating for Xi. This will lead China to respond by invading Taiwan before Japan develops offensive weapons. As Beckley 21 explains, China attacks not when it feels confident about the future, but when it worries its enemies are closing in. Essentially, the CCP wages war when it perceives a closing window of opportunity to consolidate control over disputed areas such as Taiwan. He furthers that this pattern holds true regardless of the strength of China's opponent. Mid-North 21 finds that it would only take 2 or 3 days for China to invade Taiwan, while ISDP 18 finds that it would take a year for Article 9 to go into effect, meaning a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could occur before Japan develops offensive capabilities. A Chinese invasion on Taiwan would be devastating. Yang 19 finds within 7 days of conflict, 240,000 soldiers and civilians would perish. The second scenario is economic aggression. Turner finds that if Beijing truly feared Taiwan's imminent and formal separation from China, a message affirming suggests Taiwan would be vulnerable to a major recession. Russell 20 finalizes that the impact on Taiwan could be worse than any of the previous global recessions. Contention 2 is alliances. The liberal order is as strong as ever, as Sheikh of the Atlantic finds last month, Ukraine's tenacity and creativity has ignited civil society energy. However, Japanese revision disturbs this process of peace in 2 key ways. The first is closing the U.S. nuclear umbrella. Revision destroys the perception of U.S. security guarantees, as Wadsworth 19 finds neighbors see as a sign that Tokyo is losing confidence in U.S. credibility, with starting a chain reaction that causes more U.S. allies to head with China or to develop their own strike capabilities, further increasing instability. These alliances are crucial, as Austin 17 explains. Scaling back the alliance with destabilization and beyond, China would emerge the big winner, causing chaos in strategic waterways from the South China Sea through the East China Sea and into the Sea of Japan. Attempting to maintain America's worldwide alliance system might become impossible, as no reassurances would be sufficient for jittery partners. The second is exacerbating historical wedges. Kyoto found just 6 months ago, Japan, South Korea, and the US just reaffirmed their partnership in the denuclearization of North Korea, improving relationships. However, Kelly 08 finds Japan's neighbors are fearful of a resurgent Japanese military unchecked by international constraints and rising domestic Japanese nationalism stoked by conservative political leaders in Tokyo. Cho 18 warns South Korea does not believe Japan has wholeheartedly apologized for the abuse and exploitation of comfort women in World War II, viewing Article 9 as the only show of remorse from Japan. This is why South Korea has been particularly sensitive to Japan's remilitarization. Thus, Sterling 20 concludes, if Japan revises Article 9 right now, the security of the East Asian region is at risk, as allies would back away from Japan out of fear. The impact of breaking alliances is small-scale conflicts. Carmen 18 warns that the solution to Chinese gray zone conflicts is not a military one, but a political one, based on collective alliances and requirements for resilience. Gomez 18 finds the possibility of a class escalating is extremely high. Mazar 15 observes such escalation is worsened because informal coalitions have had difficulty coming to a consensus on the degree of threat involved with these incremental moves. Overall, Payne 16 quantifies that it can lead to death levels beyond 100 million, as China is armed with chemical and biological weapons and would pursue expansionist policies in Europe and Asia. For these reasons, negate.
Yes, can we call for the card?
I want to call for the Article 9 is going to take a year to implement, or revising Article 9 is going to take a year, whatever that is.
Do you want? Can you send that?
The
Yeah.
Article 9.
Put that into the doc. Give me a second.
And I'm ready for cross when you are.
Give me a moment to put in the doc first.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Once he puts in the card.
Put it into the next section. It should be right there at the doc. Let me know when you can see it.
I see that.
Okay. Ready? You good for cross?
Yes. Hold on. Let me get the timer ready. You can have the first question because you spoke first.
For sure.
My time will start now.
Okay, so would you agree that Xi Jinping is a rational actor?
Yes.
Okay, great. Do you want a question?
Okay. You said that Kishida expressed concern over Taiwan. What did he specifically say he was going to do about Taiwan?
That he defended in the event they had a conflict if they had a military force. And I'd say that they're really good allies right now.
Okay.
So your first intention is pretty confusing surrounding the fact of China invading Taiwan. So in the status quo, will China invade Taiwan?
No.
No. Why
The
not?
cost is way too high.
What are the costs?
Well, you would have to mobilize all those troops.
They already
And
have them mobilized though on the South China Sea border. That's what they've been doing for the past like 7 years.
Well, also all wars are expensive, so
Sure.
there'd also be an economic drawback.
I think
Now, wait. Let me ask you a question. Okay. So you ran two contentions, right? Or three?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
ran
two
two. The latter half of your second contention, are you advocating for nuclear proliferation or against it?
Yes. Yes. We're saying that when you see more nuclear proliferation, you'll see more deterrence because it raises the bar to entry into a nuclear war because the leaders know like, oh, okay, this is a weapon of mass destruction. We're not going to use it to like incite a conflict because we don't want to take all these losses. That's why in the status quo, when China understands that the United States isn't going to get nuclearly involved in Taiwan, they can go engage in a conventional conflict and they're not deterred to go into Taiwan. But when you affirm and you give nukes to Japan, Japan has that nuclear deterrence and China's like, oh no, Japan has nukes. They're not going to. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you agree that that China isn't fond of Western influence?
Well, China, yeah, I guess China isn't fond
Okay,
of
great.
Western
So
influence.
yeah.
But
So if Article 9 was created by the United States, thus is a direct Western influence into Japan, wouldn't kicking out Article 9 and kicking out that Western influence prove to amend relations between China and Japan?
I believe you're oversimplifying everything. As we say, even though Article 9 is like conceptually like Western, I guess, because it was made with the Japanese and the US, China actually doesn't want Japan to revise Article 9 for the historical trauma reasons that we mentioned in our case.
Okay, sure.
For the exacerbating of historical wedges. Anyways, that's cross.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Is anyone not ready? Okay, it's just going to be going down their case, starting with an overview. Okay. Start on the overview. Algapa 14 tells you that nuclear weapons raise the barrier to entry in a war. What does this mean? Basically, if China wants to invade Taiwan, a conventional war is significantly less deadly than a nuclear one. At that point, it is significantly more likely that China is going to invade when Japan does not have a nuclear deterrent extended to Taiwan than when they do. They lose on their C1 as soon as they read their links. They bind themselves really big here because they try and stand up and tell you that China is not going to attack Taiwan because of this high costs. However, one piece of paper is not going to change these costs. And at that point, China is not going to attack in the afterworld either way. Their impact doesn't get triggered. But second of all, they literally read you a card right now saying that China will engage Taiwan. This is the narrative we're going to go for, that in the status quo, China is going to attack Taiwan. But here's a few top shelf responses as to why amending Article 9 is not going to anger China. First of all, tensions are already bad right now. Cheng 14 finds that the number of incidents in the past 2 years between the two countries suggests that confrontation have increased, while both countries looking to extend to territorial waters and airspace, including China flying battleships in the Senkaku Islands. Second of all, relations between Japan and China have been on the decline when an annual bilateral security dialogue initiated in 1993 was halted. This means that China is already angry at Japan right now. All these impacts about how China is like going to attack them because they're angry should have already been triggered. But then second of all, dealing because Japan will revise Article 9 in an unprovocative way, Lin 14 finds that in announcing the reinterpretation of Article 9 last week, Abe emphasized that his government would need legislative approval before the SDF could be sent, and Tokyo has already reinterpreted and reformed its laws without poking the bear, without angering China. And while China is modernizing its navy, Japan is taking more defensive postures along with embracing the US-Japanese alliance. This is really crucial because even if you revise Article 9 does not inherently mean you will anger China. This is key. Keep this idea throughout the round. But then on the top shelf also, Japan is the second strongest military in the world. The implications of this are that even though they're called the self-defense force, they could easily launch an offensive strike against China. There's no such thing as an offensive weapon except for nuclear weapons. At that point, China should be scared and should have attacked long, long ago. But then you implicate this out to our first contention of hybrid warfare, because even though Japan has the means to defend itself, it cannot because of the roadblock of Article 9. That's why hybrid warfare is really key in defending against China. That's why China is going to be more scared when Japan can use hybrid warfare to defend itself. But then talk about the internal link level. We tell you Japan could nuclearize overnight, even though they're going to stand up and tell you that Article 9 is going to take a year to pass. That's talking about referendum and getting 2/3 of Congress to actually, or Parliament to actually pass that. The resolution is not saying you should start the process. You're saying you're already amending Article 9. At that point, Japan can nuclearize overnight, while it'll take China 2 to 3 days or even weeks to launch an offensive military attack. At that point, Japan's already going to have nuclear weapons and will vehemently defend Taiwan, as our evidence points to, because of the history between the two countries. But then 3 more big ideas here. First of all, China will attack Taiwan because of the Ukrainian precedent. Russia has received no military backlash, showing U.S. extended deterrence is weak. But then second, Feng 22 tells you that China literally has a whistleblower that admitted they will attack Taiwan in a few months. But then third, U.S. security treaties do not actually ensure the protection of Taiwan. At that point, China, there is sitting duck waiting for China to attack in literally a few months, or you affirm and stop all this through hybrid warfare and nuclear deterrence. Now let's move on to their contention 2. First of all, realize that HOOF 20 finds that extended nuclear deterrence is inherently dubious. If their impact is allies going to China right now, or allies going to China as soon as you affirm, allies should be going to China anyway because they don't trust U.S. extended deterrence. But then the really big dealing concern here is going to be that Article 9 has nothing to do with United States security commitments. First of all, they try and stand up and tell you that because Japan acquires nuclear weapons or its own offensive military, that means that all of a sudden the NATO alliance is weakened. This makes no sense. In fact, I'd argue the opposite. Sugawa 2000 finds that the reinterpretation of Article 9 rationales is anchoring the United States in the alliance, and Japan should expand its military contribution. And empirically, Richard 16 finds that whenever Japan is pushing for more offensive military operations, the US first supports this, and B, literally gives them troops. At that point, do a gut check here. They're trying to tell you that China is going to attack Japan whenever they are stronger rather than they are weaker. This makes no sense. If they want to win the war, they're going to attack when they are weaker, not when the alliance is significantly bolstered and US credibility is significantly bolstered by Japan, the second strongest military in the world, now having offensive capabilities along with literal nuclear weapons. That's why China's not going to attack in the AF world, and that's why you must affirm.
Could I just see the evidence that says Japan can nuclearize overnight? Thanks.
It's in the prep train. Yeah, second page.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna start running prep starting now. Okay, that was 40 seconds. Is everyone ready? Cool. I'll be first going down our case, then addressing our opponent's case. Okay. Let's start on our case. Our opponents give you a bunch of responses, but you can really group them into 3 categories. First, they try to tell you that Japan will proliferate, which will deter China. 2 key problems with this argument. First, Kalaki 21 finds that Japan has very strong anti-nuclear weapon sentiments. This is really important because Japan is the only country that's actually been bombed by these weapons and had a power plant explode, which is really important because what we'd argue is that there's nowhere where Japan would ever get these nuclear weapons in the first place. Even if they had the capability to do so, they wouldn't actually have the intention to do so because the people don't want these nuclear weapons. But second, realize that their evidence talking about how Japan can develop nuclear weapons overnight is from the Global Times, which is a Chinese Communist Party funded newspaper. We would argue that clearly this is not an evidence that you can buy. Japan cannot get nuclear weapons overnight. This is China's Communist Party trying to fearmonger and boast nationalism within their borders. That's why we'd argue that overall, you cannot buy anything in this round where they try to tell you that Japan will proliferate. The second key category of responses I give you is this idea that China will want to attack Taiwan. We also give you a bunch of reasons why, but we would argue that we agree. We completely agree that China wants Taiwan. The only difference is how exactly China will take Taiwan. We see that right now, China is flying planes near our border to try to threaten us into coercion and try to unite with China peacefully. China is not going to invade Taiwan because it knows that the cost is too high. That's for two reasons. First, we would argue that the invasion of Taiwan would be too costly because China needs to land a bunch of ships, which, as you've seen with Ukraine, even if a big country attacking a small country can cost them a bunch of lives. But second, and more importantly, it exposes them to a bunch of sanctions from abroad. And we would argue that China's economy is much more dependent on the world than Russia is. That's why we would argue that China wants peaceful unification. No matter how much they want Taiwan, they won't actually invade. They'll keep doing what they've been doing for the past 70 years, which is use this threat and isolate Taiwan, which overall means Taiwan will peacefully reunite them. But go to our second argument on alliances. They give you one big response here, which is that Article 9 has nothing to do with the US's alliances in Asia. Realize that we give you specific reasons as to why this is true. First, because it shows our revising Article 9 shows that Japan doesn't trust the US's nuclear guarantee. And second, and more importantly, it shows that Japan is creating all these traumas from World War II in which they attack neighboring countries like South Korea. And so we would argue that those are the two key reasons as to why Japan revising Article 9 uniquely harms these alliances in Asia. This goes clean conceded by our opponents. They don't actually respond to our reasoning as to why this is true. But now let's go on to our opponent's arguments. At the top, realize that there's four key problems with all their arguments. The first is that all their arguments rely on this idea that China will attack Japan or Taiwan and eventually lead to this global war where it's China versus the US. Realize the key problem with this argument is that we would argue that that there's never going to be a world where China starts a war with the US because both of these countries have nuclear weapons, which is why we would argue that there's no way that the impacts are ever going to be happening because it's super unlikely that Xi Jinping will just start these wars. But second, SIG-19 of voters writes that nearly 2/3 of voters are against developing offensive capabilities, while less than a third are for it. That's really important because what we would argue is that even in a world where Japan does actually have the capacity to increase its military, it won't actually do so because the people don't support the individual pieces of legislation that are needed after Article 9. That means that they won't pass the laws that are actually needed to field ships, to field troops, to actually put like bases on other countries, which is why we would argue that regardless of whether they have the capacity to have offensive capabilities, they won't actually develop them. But third, by 19 finds that even if Article 9 is passed, Japan won't actually have the ability to defend itself or Taiwan. That's because Brian 21 finds that China already spends more than the rest of Asia combined. That's why we would argue that Japan will never be enough to deter China. China is clearly the strongest military in the region. But now let's go on to the specific arguments. On their first argument on staying modern, realize that their own impact tells you that China will eventually attack Japan and start an armed conflict. We would argue that they themselves tell you that the only country that China would ever attack is Taiwan, not Japan. We would argue that this argument is clearly not true. But go to their second argument on Taiwan. The key problem with this argument is that their own evidence tells them out. It tells you that even though China considered attacking Taiwan in the fall, it actually stopped doing so because it was so reliant on the global economy and worried about sanctions. We'd see that specifically after Ukraine, you see that these big countries know that they can't just bully their smaller neighbors around because they're so dependent on their economy. Today is a clear con ballot. Is everyone ready for cross?
Yeah. Can I have first question?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so just to clarify, will China attack Taiwan or will they not attack Taiwan? Can't have it both ways, right?
Yeah, we're saying that China will not attack Taiwan by military means, right? They want to take Taiwan back, right? The way that they're going to do that is by having a bunch of big planes and big tanks on our borders in order to threaten Taiwan to make them try to peacefully reunite with China. Because China knows if it tries to attack Taiwan right now,
Taiwan's just going to sit up and be like, yeah, take us. Taiwan's just going to be like, oh, there's been a military buildup for the past century. So all of a sudden, Taiwan's just going to wake up one day and be like, oh, let's reunite with China because we're scared.
Okay, so our evidence actually gives you an insight right into Xi Jinping's mind, right? You have to understand, you yourselves tell us in first cross that Xi Jinping is not rational, right?
No, we said
dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping. Dictators, okay, sure.
So this is gone.
But let's bring up an analogy, right? Look at Putin and Ukraine, right? Putin thought that Ukraine would just bow down to him and just like let them subjugate them, right?
Which
you don't know what is going on in dictators' minds because they have all this nationalist rhetoric that they believe that their country is the greatest and all their countries want to join them, right? That's why we would argue that regardless of whether Taiwan will actually bow to Xi, Xi thinks that because he has this arrogant mindset that Taiwan is part of China, which is why we don't see that happen.
Russia understood they would take mass casualties. So does Xi Jinping. He's not like an idiot. Yeah, sure. You can have a question.
I mean, Putin isn't an idiot either. He was a former spy.
Yeah, exactly. This was a calculated. He was going to take lives. No, it's not like he was going into Ukraine thing. They would just surrender. Like
he did actually. It was all over the news. But
right, if you want to make that, if you want to go
that's that, sure. But we spent like a minute. Can I have a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. If you say that China is going to take Taiwan, why haven't you done so for the past 70 years?
Okay, we're telling you he hasn't done so because, first of all, he hasn't had the precedent. Second of all, he hasn't had the capability. China
hasn't had the precedent? What do you mean by that?
Like Ukraine, like a precedent like Ukraine. He thought extended deterrence was strong. U.S. extended deterrence was strong. Clearly, it's not because the U.S. has done absolutely nothing to defend against Ukraine.
So is Russia's invasion of Ukraine going well?
Yes, for them, very.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going well.
Yes, very. I mean,
Okay.
seriously, like
I'll
they
leave
faced.
that up to the judges to decide, right? If the judges
I will
think that
too. I mean,
Russia's
they thought that, you know, people were like, oh,
Really?
US is going to nuke Russia. Like, this is the same argument you're making.
I understand.
Russia is going to
I
get
know-
nuked. That's why they're never going to attack Ukraine. How did that work out? Well, Ukraine's
Worry
going to
about
get attacked. I have a
Worry
question.
about that. I understand. Let me just clarify something, right? If the
Sure.
judges themselves think that Russia's
Okay.
invasion of Ukraine is going badly,
Okay. Can I have a
The-
question?
if-
Now you're just
I just
reading
finished.
arguments.
Let me, since I let you finish, right?
What?
The judges think that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going badly. That clearly shows that the precedent is that these invasions don't work, which means that she knows that he doesn't want to take Taiwan by force. He wants to use peaceful unification. But do you want a question?
Peaceful unification. That went well. Okay, yeah, sure. So let's talk about the people, right? You basically stand up and say the Japanese people don't want nuclear weapons. Do the United States people want nuclear weapons?
It's not what the U.S. wants that matters. The U.S. doesn't control Japan's parliament.
Oh,
Japan is a
does the-
democracy.
Well, hold on.
It is not.
This is a really
Sure.
big idea. Do the United States people want nukes?
You mean the U.S. wants nukes for themselves, or the U.S.
Yeah,
wants
it's the populate wants nukes. Just really quickly.
what? Sure, the U.S. I don't know actually. That's not relevant to this debate. Like,
Right,
why do you
that's
care
not-
whether the U.S. wants nukes or not?
We're gonna take prep.
It's time.
Right.
I have it as 145 years. It's gonna go af and neg and some win in between. Is everyone good? Let's start off with the really clear narrative of this round. The narrative is that since China is a reasonable actor, they're going to attack a country that is weaker than them and not stronger. That means that China would rather attack Japan when they're weaker, not when they're stronger. That's why you affirm, let Japan get stronger and stop China. Let's go down our case. The first thing it tells you is that China's afraid of a nuclear war. They're not going to attack the United States. Two really big things. First, they missed the Nathan 12 analysis in our case that tells you that the United States is like binded into the fact where they're not going to get militarily involved into Taiwan because they'll just exacerbate the issue. But secondly, the United States doesn't have a security treaty with Taiwan. They're not going to defend. China is provoked because of Ukraine, the Ukrainian president. I'll get into that later. But secondly, he's going to try and tell you that Japan isn't going to proliferate because the public doesn't want it. This is really bad analysis because it doesn't matter what the public thinks insofar as the government has control over whether they proliferate or not. In the United States, for example, the public doesn't want the nuclear weapons, but we have so many nuclear weapons because the government wants them. The ruling LDP party of Japan wants the nuclear weapons, they're going to get the nuclear weapons. But secondly, that's really important because of the overnight evidence. They have the technology, they can develop it overnight. Then he's going to try and tell you that Article 9 can still defend because they have a really strong military. They missed the internal link of the hybrid defense subpoint that tells you that because of Article 9, they can't use that really strong defense to the best of its ability. That's why you affirm, make Japan get stronger, give them more and more defense so they can use their defense to the max and stop Taiwan and stop China, excuse me. But then on the impact of China's expansion, he's going to tell you it's not Taiwan, it's only Taiwan, not Japan. He misses the Sakaku Islands, like the point we give you that tells you it's proxy wars and like other small islands that they're attacking. You see lives lost there. You see millions of lives lost in a like eventual war. But on Taiwan, in their case, the very first thing it tells you is that like people don't want it. Again, it's not about the public, it's about the government. But secondly, he's gonna try and say that our overnight card has bias. We'll tell you no. They completely misconstrued the card. The card is from Biden saying that Japan has the ability to develop overnight. It's not biased. But secondly, I'm going to tell you that China is trying to threaten, and they're not going to invade for two reasons. The first is because they have a bunch of it's a lot of military buildup. I'll tell you, no, they've been military building up for the past like 70 years. They have the capability. And secondly, the economic idea, the South China Sea gives them an economic advantage. They're going to invade, get the economic advantage, and they won't be sanctioned by other countries because they're a really big trading partner. But even in the end, if you don't buy any of that, buy the best analysis, which is Fang 22 that goes drop that tells you that regardless of anything, Xi Jinping still wants to invade by fall. That's your time frame. That's where you're going to vote. But on the contention about alliances, they missed the term that Eric gives you about the Richard 16 that tells you that when you see more military involvement in Japan, you see more United States helping Japan and more like alliances. That's why when you affirm, you raise the bar for alliances, you see more and more people helping. That's why in the end, Proof 20 tells you that the deterrent effect of United States is not really good right now. That's why you need Japan to nuclearize. That's why in the end of the day, we're going to win on two weighing links. The first is time frame, because we tell you by fall of 2022, China is going to invade. You want to affirm to help them stop. But secondly, on magnitude, because we tell you when China invades, it's going to provoke into a nuclear war. You want to stop it, save the 2 billion lives.
Okay, we're going to run all 3 minutes for prep starting now.
I have it as all your prep.
I have it at 2:45.
Use 30 seconds for rebuttal, right?
Oh yeah, sorry. That's all I've got.
Okay, give me a second. Wait, do you want to mute your Slack? Thank you. Give me a second to get my timer ready. For a brief, okay. For a brief off-time roadmap, first I'm going to extend our case, Then I'm going to do some frontlining. Then I'm going to do some weighing, so I compare both of our cases. And then I'm going to go over their case and explain why you shouldn't vote for them. So my time will start now. Let's start on our case. The easiest place to vote on today's round is on our second contention of alliances, specifically our second argument of exacerbating historical wedges. Kyoto finds 6 months ago key actors in Asia have just reaffirmed their partnership. Sterling observes that if Japan revises Article 9 right now, allies like South Korea would back away from Japan out of fear. Kelly warns that this is because their neighbors are extremely sensitive to Japan's remilitarization, and Article 9 is the sole mutually agreed upon doctrine that checks Japan's egregious actions in World War II. Affirming breaks alliances. The impact without alliances, Carmen finds, are Chinese gray zone conflicts, which will be unstoppable and lead to death levels beyond 100 million, as escalations are extremely likely due to an increase in clashes. Now, in rebuttal, they don't read any responses to our to this contention. Don't let them bring up new responses in final focus. However, in their summary, they keep saying that Japan will help U.S. capabilities in the region by building up its military. And wait, sorry, yeah. But remember, that the US will help build up Japanese capabilities. And that's really important because we would argue that the enhancement is not what these allies in the region want. Because remember, all the literal atrocities Japan has done in World War II, like the exploitation of innocent women, even if Japan's military helps the US in the region, they think this increased help, the other countries in the region think that this increased help actually harms because of this World War II historical trauma. Even if you believe everything our opponents say in this round, we would still argue our argument on preserving alliances in the region is much more important than anything else than our opponents talk about. That's because the infighting between these countries of Japan's militarization brings back this World War II trauma that would weaken the alliance. That would weaken the alliance. And moreover, prefer our argument based on probability. Countries perceive gray zone conflicts gray zone operations as less likely to trigger war than a full-blown invasion. So our escalation scenario is much more likely to happen than their argument on countries doing like a full nuke war. Moreover, we should prefer our impact because our impact is actually probable, because at this point, their impact of like nuke war with like these absurd link chains is just fear-mongering rhetoric. And you don't even know if their impact will actually manifest. Therefore, their magnitude weighing doesn't even take into account at all because their impact will never, ever actually manifest. Now, let's go on to their case. The biggest problem with all their arguments is that Japan won't actually develop the means to defend itself or Taiwan, and they never respond to our wide response, which tells you that Japan will actually never proliferate, and realize that their own evidence tells you that while China considered invading Taiwan in the fall, they actually chose not to. Moreover, you should completely not buy anything they say because of their evidence is pretty much Chinese Communist Party propaganda, as well as alleged Russian documents, which is just incredibly, there's a lot of doubt on that. For these reasons, negate.
Okay, we're gonna take some prep. That's
Before
fine with
Grand
anyone.
Cross.
Before grand, yeah. Okay, don't mind us. All right, 15 seconds of prep. So we
Okay,
have one left.
ready for cross? Y'all ready for Grand Cross?
Alex, would you handle cross?
What?
Sure.
Maybe, okay. Okay. Do you want first question?
Wait, can you guys hear us?
Yep.
Okay, ready for
great.
cross?
There we go.
You guys can have the first question.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So let's talk about this Chinese propaganda, right? Do you know who in our card like actually made that statement?
What is the source?
Okay,
Biden.
Joe Biden.
Yeah,
is
but it's a source
propaganda.
from the Chinese mainland,
But
which
who
means
said it? It's
that.
a quote from
It's a quote
Biden.
From Biden, though.
Okay, wait. Let me explain something. I used to live in China, I know like that the CCP there's distorts information all the time. The internet is restricted. If the CCP loves to distort information. So
America is funded
did
by China
Biden say
at
that?
some point.
We
Yeah,
don't
Biden
know. If it's from a CCP source, it can't be trusted because it has been taken
So
because
then,
it is literally the Chinese communist government has
so
written that source. Are you saying you're willing to believe whatever the Chinese
okay,
Communist Party
okay.
tells you?
Importantly, right? We really don't need to have.
Let's respond.
Let me respond.
Sure.
Okay. First,
Yes.
even if it was propaganda, wouldn't China want to make Japan seem less of a threat so China could seem more of a threat because China's China's building up their nuclear like all their military capabilities and they want to seem stronger. So wouldn't they want to?
Wait. Can you make your question a little more concise? Because
Yeah,
that was a
sure.
response.
Sure. So let's get this right. Okay, you're standing up and telling us that China is paying Joe Biden or paying some guy to make it seem like Joe Biden is saying that Japan is stronger than China. Why would they possibly do that?
you're
We don't
putting a
need to
lot
have
of words in
this
my
debate at all. Wait, we really don't need to have this debate at all. The key response to your argument that you concede is the fact that your own evidence said, right, that that Japan will drag the U.S. into war if China attacks it. That's what you read in case. You
Yes,
said that
correct.
if China attacks Japan, that causes a U.S.-China war, right?
Yes.
You
Or
concede
that-
the response that means that China will never start that war in the first place because they don't want a nuclear full-blown war with the United States,
First of
right?
all, this is a new
That was
response.
conceded throughout the round.
Hold on,
No.
this is a new response in Grand Cross. We never concede that. Second of all, this is
No,
the
it was
response I would have
rebuttal.
given if you made this in rebuttal. I would have stood up and said,
Wait.
it's not about what will actually happen. It's about what
Wait.
China perceives that will happen.
And also,
And
okay,
Clarify
also,
the truth. That was my first response in rebuttal. That was my whole case.
the narrative I give you is that the Nathan 12 card that I extended, the first thing in my summary was that U.S. is bounded right now. They can't get militarily involved. That goes dropped by you guys. So that means that's why China is not afraid
You
of it.
said that about Taiwan.
US,
You said that
because
about
they know that
Taiwan.
US is going to nuclearize. That's why
Let's
they're
clear
gonna
something up,
get-
right? Let's make something very clear. Let's make something very clear. In case you tell us that the impact of China attacking Japan is a U.S.-China war, which means
Let me-
you
let me-
yourself said that the U.S. will be involved, right?
Yes.
the
That
way
means
they-
that China will never attack Japan in the first place. But that's cross. But that's cross.
It's not cross. We have 15 seconds.
So the way it works is that when China gets conventionally involved, it escalates into a
It is
nuclear
cross to be
conflict.
timed.
That was the
Let's
thing-
just
I had 5 seconds left.
let's just end cross, okay?
All right, we're going to take running for it then. That's all the time I have. Is anyone not ready? Okay, perfect. The cleanest place to vote is on our Taiwan contention. We stand up and tell you that China, if anything, will attack when Japan and Taiwan are weak, not when they are strong. This is what makes sense in the round. I stand up in rebuttal, and the first thing I read is the Algapa 14 analysis that tells you nuclear weapons raise the barrier to entry for war. The cost-benefit analysis that China is doing right now is basically they can attack Taiwan. The US is not required to defend Taiwan. Pretty much nothing happens. They can just take the island. The cost-benefit analysis China will be doing afterwards is that Japan has nuclear weapons, and because of their history, will do anything to defend Taiwan with these nuclear weapons. If their key is regime survival or they're a rational actor, they will inherently not attack Taiwan because they are afraid of nuclear retaliation. This is where you see the impacts. First of all, on their own case, they talk about a Taiwan-China war being 240,000 lives. You give us that impact right there. Second of all, we tell you that conventional war will inadvertently escalate to nuclear war. When Japan got nuclear bombs dropped on it, they didn't know that would happen. That's why they started the war, just like China would not know they would get nuked. However, they go go into Taiwan, it inadvertently escalates to nuclear war. That's where you see our impact materialize. That's where you see these millions of lives. Now let's move on to their case. They drop 3 links I give you on their allies point, which has been cold conceded. He stands up and tells you that we don't give you any responses. These were brought up in rebuttal. We extended them through summary. First of all, Hoof 20 finds that extended deterrence is inherently dubious. This is really crucial because the United States, the allies should not have confidence in the United States anyway right now, and they should be moving to China, and this 100 million lives impact through like some alliances should get triggered already. But then second of all is return from credibility. We tell you Sagawa 2000 finds that, in fact, if anything, revising Article 9 increases the strength of the alliance and increases the credibility of the alliance. Furthermore, through hybrid warfare, they can actually defend themselves with the tools they have. It makes no sense that China would attack when NATO is stronger. They would, if anything, attack when they're weaker. Furthermore, if the entire internal link is on the reliability and credibility of the alliance, whenever you have more power, you're going to have a stronger alliance. But then you buy the Richer 16 evidence, which tells you that the US has empirically supported Japanese tries to become more offensive and increase its military strength. At that point, you affirm to save lives.
Okay, cool. I'll be first going on our opponent's case, then I'll be doing some weighing, which is why our case is more important, and I'll be going down our case. Is everyone ready? Just give me a thumbs up. Cool. Let's start on the last argument our opponents have left in today's round, which is their argument on Taiwan. Realize that their whole argument hinges on the idea that China wants to take Taiwan right now. But the fact that they cold concede throughout the entire round is that their own evidence calls them out and tells you that China considered taking Taiwan in the fall, but they still didn't because they knew that the cost would be too high. Their own evidence sells them out. They keep trying to tell you that the US wouldn't get involved. But realize the key problem with this argument is that the reasoning their evidence gives you is not that the US would get involved militarily, but that the US would sanction China just like it is doing with Russia right now. You see of the Ukraine conflict that cost is way too high, which is why China would never attack in the first place. This means that their argument on Taiwan is completely useless because there's no need to defend Taiwan because he wants to take it peacefully because he knows that if he invades, the cost will be too high. You can't vote on their argument. The place that you can't vote is on our second argument on alliances. This is the most important argument in today's round. That's because as soon as you affirm Article 9, Japan has this military, which in World War II, they used to attack other countries like South Korea and Indochina countries. That's really important because what we would argue is that means that the US's allies in the region distrust Japan and they have infighting. That's really important because what we would argue is that this is much more important than any argument because if these allies fight against each other, it destroys the US's credibility abroad and it shows that there is no alliance there to deter China. That means that these countries are fighting against each other instead of cooperating against China, including in a contingency involving Taiwan, which means we take their argument, but it also means it expands elsewhere in the world where the US has credibility. They bring up 3 new responses in Final Focus that were not in summary. Realize that even though they were in rebuttal, they didn't extend them in summary, which is really important because that's not allowed in public forum. You can't let them bring these up again because they already dropped them in summary. But second, and more importantly, we would argue it's not the US's credibility in the region that matters. It's the fact that these countries are fighting against each other. Right now, if they work together, they can deter China. But the moment that they start fighting against each other because of Article 9 being revised is the moment that this Iron Curtain falls against China, which is the moment that China starts expanding, which is why we'd say that today is a very clean pawn ballot. Good round, y'all, and thank you for judging.
Yeah, thank you.
Good round.
That was a great round. Just give us a couple minutes. We'll write up our RFDs and we'll be right back with everyone. Alrighty, so it seems like all the judges have submitted their ballots, and whenever everybody's ready, please let me know. Awesome. So which of the judges can go first? I can go first. I don't mind.
Can you just tell us who won? What was the decision?
Yeah, the decision was for the NEG, the Taipei American. It was a 2-1 decision.
Okay. I'm one of the judges that voted for Taipei, so I can't go first. I think whoever voted for the affirmative should go first.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I would say my reasoning for I was the AF. So I wrote down a lot in the paper so everybody can see in the RFD later on. Personally, to me, I felt both had great resources and everybody should be very proud of themselves. You guys made it very far. This is a very awesome round. And both had great resources, great relevant to their argument. Personally, myself, I felt like the app's argument were very wide ranged, and I felt like sometimes the neg did not address certain points and contentions, and I feel like that's where the neg lost some points. For instance, the apps spoke about mostly about the Senkaku Islands, or in addition, I believe there's something else I wrote down here. The gray zone tactics, I felt like they covered a lot of large range, and I felt like sometimes the neg were missing things. Also, I felt like the neg was kind of sometimes tunnel vision. I felt like the cross examination between the neg and the app was mostly about like who said this, and trying to there's a heavily topic about the Chinese invasion on Taiwan. However, I felt like the apps were mostly relating back to the topic, because the topic is Article 9, and they're talking about the revision. And in the beginning, the apps actually spoke about how Japan had revisited the has been like revisiting and analyzing the Article 9, which is a really big point, because if they are visiting and like visiting it, that kind of shows. And then I felt like the NAG didn't talk about that. I felt like it was sometimes it was great that the NAG was able to win in that Chinese and Taiwan invasion. However, I felt like it was a very narrow and tunnel vision. And the NEG also did a really good job about hypotheticals. Like they did a good job about the NEG world, saying we cannot go off of these hypotheticals, which makes a lot of sense. However, the AF had just a wider, I feel like there's a lot of things that the AF spoke about that was not addressed. And I feel like that's where the NEG kind of lacked. Also, I think that sometimes the analyzation of the resources were just a little like the whole entire Joe Biden quote, and like that could have been addressed a little bit better on, I think, on the neg side, because if Joe Biden said it, I don't know. But other than that, I think that also personally, I think in the PF, you have to be careful with using personal experiences. The CCP is propaganda, which is terrible and devastating. No limit. There's like a hard limit on the freedom of speech, which is terrible. However, mostly in AF and in PF, you have to be able to have direct quotes and direct evidence. That's why I felt like with the linking of the resources, it was done better with the AF, because they had quotes and people and resources. I felt like personal resources, sometimes I had another debate tournament that was yesterday, that was around that it's very difficult when you have personal experience, because it's very hard to judge off of personal experiences when you have actual reports and articles and statistics of general population opinions that kind of have a greater link. But overall, great round. Everybody should be proud of themselves. That was awesome.
Okay, so thank you very much for the feedback, and I voted for neg, I along with Judge Cecilia Shi, I believe. Um, I think I agree with the other judge who went first. He said that both teams are great, and I definitely agree with that, because I do think affirmative was very strong, even though I didn't vote for them. I think that it was definitely a very close round. I think both teams deliver excellent speeches, and it was just really it was just close. Like it's 2-1 for a reason, right? Because it's not like a landslide win or anything like that, because both teams did so well. And I also agree with the evidence of propaganda that the other judges cited in his explanation, because I felt that like Neg pointed out was definitely correct in pointing out that the affirmative use of propaganda, and for me, if it's a propaganda, whatever they use cannot be trusted, because so the bias issue for me was a real problem. So that's why I couldn't vote for F, because they use propaganda, and I think it's better if they used other sources that are more credible than propaganda, and that way they could have improved their round much better. Yeah, so I mostly it was just the propaganda thing that prevented me from voting for F, because the bias issue is just it cannot be ignored. So yeah.
So I just want to add on top of those two judges, I do agree with Judge John Paul. For the flow, I feel the F did better, addressed it better, and then the net part dropped a couple of points, which should be addressed for the F. The reason, my main reason voting for the neg is are because first F, because F collapsed on C2, and both teams collapsed on their C2. So FC2 about nuclear weapon nuclear weapon raised the barrier of wars. So this tends to provide more deterrence and reduce the likelihood of wars. But the F also emphasized on the nuclear proliferation will strengthen the allies. U.S. allies, and make this alliance much stronger. So for that, it's a little bit contradictory to me, because when you have more nuclear proof, you have more chances of miscalc, and that's why NFU is in place in the first place. And also, U.S. has a very strong posture against using nuclear weapon. That's why I feel, you guys are a little bit contradictory. If you collapse on your C1, that I will buy that better. But for your C2, on one hand, you said, okay, it's a strong deterrence, because if Japan proliferates, Japan has nuclear weapon, it's a strong deterrence. China will be more cautious, not doing something. On the second side, you kind of promote more alliance to proliferate for South Korea, for Philippines, other countries. When more countries have nuclear weapons, I don't think it's really a good idea for the peace of the whole world. And the second reason for my voter is for the weighing. So for probability, I do buy that for the next alliance contention, like fighting for the alliance to fight against each other, is much more probable than the nuclear war. Although miscalc does increase the chances of nuclear war, other than the two nuclear bombs U.S. thrown in Japan during World War II, there's no single nuclear war during the whole human history. So I believe the impact for FC2 is China-U.S. war, and any conventional war will be escalated to nuclear war. So the likelihood, I don't think is as high as the allied countries fighting against each other due to the historical trauma in World War II. Invasion by Japan, and then the war crime committed by Japan. And then the other thing is for time frame. F does give a piece of evidence saying the invasion time frame will be this fall, very quick. However, any of the prediction of future, because this is more like international relationship, right? There's a lot of prediction or opinion. You have to give me a little bit stronger. Say in the past, if China has some like quick invasions in other countries, then it's a little bit more believable. Then the next thing, like in the past 70 years, there's no invasion. Then you have to give me a really strong reason why the status quo is suddenly changed. Because the F does mention that in the recent years, like because the President Xi got power, and because the previously it seems like the conditions are not ready, not mature yet. But these are more prescriptive. I need to know a little bit more quantitative or more convincing or more solid evidence saying, yeah, the status quo is suddenly changed. That's why it triggers that the invasion suddenly will happen in this fall, because that's like a very sudden change in time frame. 70 plus years versus now it's May, almost May, like 4 months. You have to tell me the reason why that sudden change will happen. That convinced me that. I think these are the two main reasons for me to vote for neg. Any questions for the judges?
Yeah, any questions?
Not
All right,
really
do it.
fast.
Very good round.
Thank you for judging.
Thank you for
Congratulations.
judging. I think my camera's frozen, so that's a little awkward, but
Thank
oh,
you
it's
for
got
judging.
it's better. It's better.
Thank you for judging.
Great round, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.